Your IEEE membership means access to insurance products featuring exclusive group rates, flexible benefit options, and portable coverage that stays with you throughout your career. Engineered to help protect your loved ones and your financial security. For more information, go to IEEEinsurance.com.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our IEEE-USA webinar, Using Hybrid Work to Improve Retention and Production While Cutting Costs. I'm your host, Jonathan Cho. Today's webinar is proudly sponsored by the IEEE Member Group Insurance Program, powered by AMBA. Please note that this webinar is not affiliated with or endorsed by our sponsor. Joining us today is CEO of the Future of Work Consultancy, Disaster Avoidance Expert, Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. Dr. Gleb has been lauded as the office whisperer and hybrid expert by the New York Times for helping leaders use hybrid work to improve retention and productivity while cutting costs. He authored the pioneering book on transitioning back to the office and managing hybrid teams post-pandemic, the bestseller titled Returning to the Office and Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams. In addition to this, he has written 7 other books. His innovative thought leadership has been highlighted in over 650 articles in prestigious publications like Harvard Business Review, Fortune, and Fast Company. His expertise comes from over 20 years of consulting for Fortune 500 companies from Aflac to Xerox, and over 15 years in academia as a behavioral scientist at UNC Chapel Hill and Ohio State. Without further ado, I will now pass it off to our presenter. Welcome, Dr. Gleb. We're very excited for what you have in store for our audience today.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. Okay, everyone. So let's talk about best practices for using hybrid work to improve retention and productivity while cutting costs. That's what we'll focus on. That's what we want to get at. Now, I want to share with you the book that Jonathan mentioned, the book about returning to the office and leading hybrid remote teams and hybrid work best practices. I'm not selling it at this webinar. You can get it for free by going to the link under my name, tinyurl.com/DAE event. Again, that's tinyurl.com/DAE event. It's also going to be in the chat that's just been shared by Jonathan. So just click on tinyurl.com/DAE event to get a copy of my book on which this presentation is based. All right. So let's talk about, first of all, the data. So I'll talk about the framing, the broad framing around hybrid work and remote work. How do we think about this? That'll be the first brief part of the presentation. Then I'll dive a bit more deeply into the data. And the data is coming straight from my book, so you can go into my book and get a lot more of the data. If whatever thoughts, arguments you want to make to your leadership teams around hybrid work and to inform your own work, thinking about hybrid work, that's going to be in the book. Then, transitioning from the data, we'll talk about some of the mistakes that leaders in IT and elsewhere often make around hybrid work. So talk about some of these dangerous judgment errors called cognitive biases and how they apply to hybrid work practices. And then at that point, again, that's also going to be much more depth in the book. And finally, I'll talk about how do you actually use hybrid work to improve retention and productivity while cutting costs. So that will be most of the presentation. I'll talk about best practices for hybrid work, meaning if you want to work sometime in the office and sometime working remotely, you can also use some of these. You can also use these if you want to work full-time remotely, but I'm going to be focusing on hybrid work, sometime in the office, sometime working remote. And again, all of that is going to be in my book for in-depth reference, which you can get by going to tinyurl.com/DAE event, which is going to be under my name, and it's also going to be in the chat. Okay, hopefully you got all that and get a chance to get the book. So let's talk about how we think and how we frame hybrid. Now, the first question I want you to think about for yourself, just kind of reflecting. Think about 2 ice creams. So you've had this presentation and you want to take a break after it. You go to your freezer, maybe you're in the office and it's going to be there, maybe you're at home, it's going to be there. and you open the freezer and you see that there's an option of two ice creams, one that contains 10% fat and one that's 90% fat-free. So 10% fat or 90% fat-free. Which of those sounds more appealing to you? So think about that. Reflect. Which of those sounds better? Now, most people, when they ask this question at in-person conferences for IEEE and other groups, tell me that they want the 90% fat-free. But of course, you're engineers, you're numerate, you know that 90% fat-free means 10% fat, and 10% fat means 90% fat-free. The challenge is that the way that we interpret information, how we make our decisions, is really influenced by how the information is framed for us. So we have a predilection, a preference for 90% fat-free. It's free of fat rather than 10% fat, even though it's actually the same statement. 10% fat means 90% fat-free, 90% fat-free means 10% fat. So what is your frame? What is your company's framing? What is your workplace framing around hybrid work? Overwhelmingly, I see hybrid work as a loss. So you've all probably heard about Amazon declaring, hey, we're going to go back to 5 days in the office, and the leadership team saying that they lost something in 2019 and that they want to go back to it. Well, they're focusing on the negatives of hybrid work. They're not focusing on the positives. They're thinking of it as a loss, as a problem, not as a disruption. And you really need to think of it as a disruption, and they need to seize opportunity of hybrid work. So you need to frame hybrid work as a major opportunity in order to take advantage, to improve retention and productivity, while at the same time cutting costs. Because if you improve productivity and retention, you'll save quite a bit of money. So that's what smart and savvy leaders at companies like Microsoft are doing. So Microsoft very smartly came out with a statement saying that, hey, we're not going to go back to the office no matter what Amazon is doing. And guess what? A number of Amazon staff are applying, very talented staff are applying to Microsoft. So Microsoft will have its choice of very talented staff from Amazon. And that's how smart and savvy leaders seize competitive advantage, because Microsoft figured out best work practices in hybrid work. And that Microsoft, of course, is a much larger company than Amazon in terms of size. So Microsoft is the largest company in the world. And Apple, which is the second largest company in the world, NVIDIA, which is the third largest company in the world, they all have hybrid work. Microsoft and NVIDIA are somewhat more flexible than Apple, but still nothing compared to Amazon. And so though Google, by the way, also, which is a little bit smaller, but still larger than Amazon, came out and said that, hey, we're not going to go back to the office 5 days a week like Amazon. And again, they have staff from Amazon applying there. So that's how you see competitive advantage. And unfortunately, Andy Jassy and the Amazon team are putting their personal comfort, what they want to see happen, ahead of the bottom line, ahead of the data. In fact, the Amazon leadership has clearly, openly acknowledged that they don't have data to back up their 5 days in the work in the office mandate. And so you need to put aside those assumptions, habits, and preferences, what you feel to be true, and really focus on the data, on the business objectives and outcomes, rather than what's personally comfortable. And that's how you'll overcome cognitive biases, decision-making errors around the future of work. And we'll talk about integrating best practices on innovative, flexible work arrangements. So let's talk about the data. First, I'll talk about some surveys, then I'll talk about some peer-reviewed research. So there have been a number of large surveys by organizations like the Harvard Business Review, Society for Human Resources, which don't have any stake in the outcome about hybrid. And we see that 75% to 85% of remote workers don't want traditional office-centric work 5 days a week, like Amazon is now declaring. 25 to 35% want full-time remote work. So that means 50 to 60% want hybrid work, which is what most normal companies are offering. 40 to 55% would leave their job if forced to come in full time. So definitely, we're already seeing a number of people leaving Amazon. Over 70% are less likely to leave if offered substantial remote work, like half the work week or so. We know that working from home improves people's well-being. Mostly, a fully remote work would make over 75% feel happier, over 70% feel less stressed, and over 75% better able to manage work-life balance. And we know how important work-life balance, happiness, and stress is to productivity. Now, there are some challenges with remote work, like 50% plus feel overworked, over 55% experience burnout, more for young adults, over 80% want fewer meetings. And the biggest issues are around virtual communication skills and technology issues. And we'll get to that in the latter half of the presentation, which will talk about hybrid work best practices. So we need to solve those problems. So I talked about the data from surveys. Let's talk about peer-reviewed randomized trials, which is the gold standard, of course, in research and evidence of what is actually going on in hybrid work. So there's a peer-reviewed randomized trial which was published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, and it's just after I already created these slides, it was just published in Nature. So Nature, which is one of the two top scientific journals. You can check that out at nature.com and search for the author of this research, who is Nick Bloom. So Nick Bloom, nature.com, you can find this trial. And that's the link to the trial. By the way, if you go to tinyurl.com/TAE event, I'll also send you a copy of the slides if you want those. So tinyurl.com/DAE event, you'll get a copy of the slides. And Jonathan will share the link in the chat once again so that you can know where to get the slides. So, major travel agency with over 35,000 staff, trip.com, and you can tell by the name it's a major travel agency, wanted to measure the impact of hybrid work versus in-office work. So it collaborated with Nick Bloom at Stanford University on a randomized trial. So here's what they did. They assigned staff in their airfare and IT divisions to a full-time schedule, half of the staff, Monday, Friday, 9 to 5, with even-numbered birthdays. So staff who had even-numbered birthdays had to come to the office like Amazon is requiring Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Then had a flexible range of hybrid work for staff with odd-numbered birthdays. So odd-numbered birthdays, these were people who are coming to the office in a flexible manner. So get about half the staff one way, half the staff another way, and very random. They didn't make any other substantial changes to adapt to hybrid work or train their managers in hybrid work, which would have been even better outcomes if they did so, like on hybrid work performance assessment. Metrics. They used two metrics of productivity, lines of code written for programmers and manager assessment of performance. Separately, they measured retention, engagement, and sick days. What did they find? In productivity, they found that manager assessment of performance wasn't different for the two groups. But for lines of code written, the hybrid group had over 4% more lines of code written. So the same metric, the hybrid group had higher productivity in lines of code written, which is really nice that you can have that. This finding aligns with the research which shows a slight boost overall on average in productivity in hybrid work. Now, other metrics. The hybrid group had a 33% improvement in retention. This is a huge gain. I mean, if you can make 5% improvement in retention, this is great. This is 33% improvement in retention. Usually, when you need to train up somebody and hire somebody, that costs you about half of a year's salary on average of that person. So 33% improvement in retention is a great cost saving. So talking about improvement in productivity and improvement in cost savings, which was two of the key points from the title of this presentation. They also had fewer sick days, which was great. Again, enabled them to be more productive. And they had higher satisfaction, so better morale for rank and file workers. But managers had lower satisfaction because most likely they didn't get any training in hybrid work management. So that's the first. Talk about a second published by NBAR, which again, there's a link and you can go to tinyurl.com/GAE event to get a copy of the slides, and it'll get you the link. So staff at a call center. So we talked about people in IT, perhaps probably many of you work in IT. Now we're talking about a different service sector, which is less trained for. So staff at a call center. They offer a chance to apply for work from home, and half were randomly chosen to work from home. So again, randomized control trial. Half stayed in the office. They didn't make any substantial changes to adapt to work from home or training managers and managing work from home staff. So this is a mostly work from home. This is 1 day a week in the office. So rather than the previous hybrid that was 3 days a week in the office, this is 1 day a week in the office. Metrics. They used three metrics of productivity this time: minutes worked per shift, calls per minute, and manager assessment of performance, and measured retention and satisfaction. So over 9 months, the work from home group had a 13% performance increase. 13% increase in performance for the work from home. So again, the previous group had something like a 4% performance increase, and they worked in the office 3 days a week, from home 2 days a week. This group was mostly working from home, coming to the office 1 day a week, and they had a 13% performance increase. So 9%, they spent working more minutes per shift because they had fewer breaks and sick days. And they had more calls per minute because most likely they had a quieter working environment. So that's the 13% performance increase. But managers, just like in the previous example, didn't see any improvement of performance, likely because they weren't able to see, they weren't visible, the higher productivity of staff who work from home. The office group attrition was 35%. The work from home group attrition was 17% over 9 months. So it's a huge 50% decrease in attrition over 9 months. So 50% improvement in retention. That's again a wonderful cost savings and great for your organizational culture and knowledge. But the promotion rate conditioned on performance decreased because there was no manager training, most likely, because as employees working remotely. So, what are the implications? Well, you want to figure out metrics for measuring hybrid productivity that are smart, specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound, because metrics will often not align with how managers assess performance. Managers can see workers, and thus they make mistakes when they evaluate performance because they don't see how well people are working from home. So managers need to be trained in developing and using effective metrics. If they lack training, they'll often underestimate the performance of those who work remotely. So we talked about productivity for individual staff who are in highly trained professional positions like you, so IT staff, and then people who are less trained in call center staff for individual lines of code written and calls. But these methods don't tell the whole story. The studies show higher productivity for those working in hybrid and remote environments, but they're about individually oriented. What about collaborative work? So let's talk about a third study on collaborative work. So this is a Harvard University study. And again, the link is there. You can go to tinyurl.com/PAE event to get the slides. The study software engineer, again, folks like perhaps many of you, at a Fortune 500 firm, which had a main campus with two buildings several blocks apart. And luckily, they started studying it before COVID hit, and they continued study into COVID. And they evaluated feedback given, which was a measure of collaboration, mentoring, and then programming output, which is more a measure of individual performance, and then retention. So engineers working in the same building as all their teammates, this was pre-COVID, received 22% more online feedback. So you had people working in buildings. There were two separate buildings. Some people had team members in the same building. Some team members were in different buildings. So some teams were spread across two buildings. Some people were on the same team in the same building. So if you were working with all of your teammates in the same building, you received quite a bit more, 22% more online feedback, which is a measure of collaboration. Now, after offices closed for COVID-19, this advantage narrows to 8%, which means that you start working together within in-person environments, and you build up that trust, and you build up that collaboration, you'll retain it when you go working from home. So that's a benefit of when you start working together to spend more time working together early on, where to build up that trust, and then spend more time working remotely. Studying together, however, does reduce programming output by 24%, and productivity reduced, especially for senior engineers by 39%, because they spent more time giving feedback. And so the trade-offs are more acute for women because they did more mentoring of this giving feedback and received more mentorship, getting feedback. and that proximity impacts career trajectories. So in the short run, your pay raise is going to be shorter or dampened, lower, because you'll be less productive in the short run. Because you'll be not as not as productive, you spend more time getting feedback and giving feedback. But in the long run, you'll be better programmer, and so your long run career trajectory will be better. So you'll have better pay raises, more retention. And so the implications of individual measures of productivity aren't enough. You really want to measure team productivity to learn about the true impact of hybrid work. So looking at mentoring and learning over time. So hopefully the data is clearer now about productivity, about retention, about well-being, challenges, and some of the peer review trials. Let's talk about some of the challenges I see when leaders make decisions around hybrid work. And these are cognitive biases, the errors we make because of how our brain is wired. One of the biggest challenges is the status quo bias. The problem is that our minds evolved in the ancient savannah, where any change was dangerous. So we were living in small tribes of 50 people to 150 people. Any changes were going to be dangerous. So that was not a good thing to have changes. So changes were dangerous in that environment because our survival was so precarious. And so if our survival was threatened by any change, it was very beneficial for us to push back against this change. It helped our survival to favor the status quo. So our intuition pushes us to do that. Whereas that's not what the modern world has. So if we think about the ancient savannah world, major changes for changes of the seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter, the modern world has many more disruptions, whether it's the COVID pandemic, the rise of generative AI, the rise of smartphones, the 2008-2009 fiscal crisis, whether it's the rise of hybrid work and remote work. They change our environment. But our intuition is to push back against any changes, even though the changes might be good for us. And we don't really see the opportunities that come with changes. We only focus on the challenges. So that's a big problem. So for many leaders, it's very comfortable to manage in the office. That's where they learned how to manage. That's where they're successful. That's what they're used to doing, especially the more experienced ones, like Andy Jassy and others at Amazon and Boeing and elsewhere. That's what feels natural and intuitive. So it's hard to adapt to the new hybrid modality. And it's hard for employees to adapt to hybrid. So that's why both employees and leaders need good guidance to adapt to hybrid work effectively. Another problem is empathy, the empathy. We tend to underestimate the importance of emotions in other people's decisions. So leaders, we tend to think of leaders as cold, hard, rational. We don't realize how uncomfortable they are in the office, especially when they haven't been trained on how to lead hybrid teams. And they make a lot of mistakes because they're not trained on leading hybrid teams, and they feel bad about themselves. They feel bad about not being in charge, not being in command, not being in control. They feel in control. They know how to manage by walking around. And so we underestimate their desires. But also leaders greatly underestimate people's desires for flexibility and well-being, their employees' desires for flexibility and well-being after the pandemic. After return to office mandates, we see that companies lose a lot of talented staff, more than they anticipate. It causes them a lot of problems. It harms their productivity, it harms their retention, it increases the costs. People are willing to take lower salaries if they have flexibility. Companies have to pay more to retain people. So this is a problem that we are definitely seeing. So this is something to understand where leaders are coming from and where employees are coming from. Another problem is called functional fixedness. When people learn one way of functioning, they tend to become fixed in that way of functioning. You might have heard of the hammer nail syndrome. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So you learn how to lead in the office, how to collaborate in the office, how to innovate, how to evaluate performance in the office. You tend to become fixed in that way of functioning, even if the context is disrupted and all the way transform from being functional to dysfunctional. So many leaders, what happened in March 2020 is that they transposed office-centric methods of collaboration, leading management on remote work. And they didn't really stop to fundamentally evaluate how they manage people. And so the problem is that they didn't get training on how to do so. Very few companies, like studies show that something like Under a third of all companies provided training to their managers on how to lead hybrid and remote teams. And so this is a problem that the leaders are not aware of how to lead in a hybrid setting, and they make bad decisions around how to do so. And we see employees also making some bad decisions about people who are less efficient in using tech tools, not knowing how to use these tools, and also making some mistakes because of that, especially for older. I've definitely seen some of that. I've worked with a number of companies on helping them figure out their hybrid and remote work transitions, and older leaders and older employees in the baby boomer generation definitely tend to struggle. So, what are the best practices for competitive advantage in the future of work? We're transitioning from, we talked about the data, we talked about the mistakes. Now we're talking about the best practices. That's going to be the last part of the presentation. So focusing on the best practices. A team-led model is the best approach. So a team-led model means that you have teams making the decisions around when and where and how to come to the office. Not the top-level leadership, not Andy Jassy at Amazon saying everyone come to the office 5 days a week, not individuals saying, well, we'll come to the office whenever we feel like it, but teams coordinating together. Because it doesn't really make sense to come to the office for yourself if your team doesn't come to the office, if your team members, because the only really point of coming to the office for most people. Now, some people will they have difficulty with work-life balance. They want to close or they want a quiet place to work. That's a minority. The vast majority of people want to come to the office to do collaborative tasks. So you really need to coordinate with your team in order to collaborate. So that's why it's best for a team-led model, for teams to collaborate and come into the office. And when I do that, I see that the large majority of teams choose a hybrid first model. Companies choose a hybrid first model where most people are coming in maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and the minority are going to be fully remote. So hybrid employees 1 to 2 days in the office, that's going to be the majority, 70 to 90%, and fully remote employees are minority, 10 to 30%. Again, that's a team-led model. And you need to adopt best practices for hybrid and remote work arrangements. As part of doing so, as I really highlighted earlier, you need to provide training for effective hybrid work, what to do at home and what to focus on in the office. Home, the best things to do are your individual head-down work, programming, analysis. You want to do your asynchronous communication at home, your emails, your Microsoft Teams messages, Slack messages. You want to do your video conference calls and phone calls at home. There's no need to distract others with your phone calls and video conference calls. And in the office, the best things to do are collaborative. So things that require more in-depth collaboration, socialize, trust building, some more intense professional development, strategic conversations, performance evaluations. But those things take up maybe 1 day a week, maybe 2 days a week, depending on your role, at most 3 days a week. But generally speaking, if- I've seen teams often fitting it into 1 day a week, and they do fine. But of course, it depends on your role. So that's another thing. Some roles, let's say sales roles, I've seen sales teams make a decision to come to the office more often, like 3 days a week, because if they do outbound calls, well, they get motivation from each other, seeing each other, making outbound calls, and learning from each other. So you might make a decision for more outbound calls in the office. Again, it depends on your role. And you want effective virtual communication and collaboration, because most people don't know how to communicate effectively and collaborate effectively. So, how do you do it? How do you communicate effectively and collaborate effectively? Let's talk about that. The first thing I want to talk about is performance management. So, this forms the basis for managers being comfortable with hybrid. Because if they're taught to manage by walking around, which unfortunately most managers are, and they don't know how to assess people when they're working in a hybrid or remote model, well, they won't trust people to work in a hybrid or remote model. So you really need to understand that trusting is essential, combined with accountability. Trust but verify. You've probably heard that phrase. For both individual tasks and collaborative tasks, including whatever organizational goals leadership identifies. Let's talk about what this means. So what you want to do is have frequent, small-scale, one-on-one meetings on a weekly basis, or once every 2 weeks, or once a month, depending on how senior you are in your role. So the more junior you are, the more frequently you want to meet with your supervisor. Also, if your role involves closer coordination with your supervisor, you want to meet more often. If your role involves more distant coordination, or if you're more senior, meeting once every 2 weeks is good, especially if you're in managerial role, once every month is fine. So what does it happen? So what you want to do is agree on 3 to 5 goals that are tied to your team's broader KPIs, key performance indicators or OKRs, objectives and key results. So whatever your team's KPIs or OKRs are, link them to weekly or every 2 weeks or monthly goals for each team member and tie those goals. So 3 to 5 goals, choose 3 to 5 goals until the next meeting. So 24 meetings before an upcoming one-on-one, the team member sends their supervisor a report on what they accomplished with their goals, the problems that they met and solved, and provide a self-evaluation of how they performed. So at these weekly, bi-monthly, or monthly one-on-ones, I recommend it's best to do in person if at all possible. You can do remotely if you need to do them, but sometimes those will be tricky conversations. And what you want to do is have them be in person if you can. Frequency depends on what works best, as I mentioned, for different team members and roles, and you want to discuss with each team member what fits their needs. For example, as I mentioned, for junior team members, more often is better. So what do you do during the one? The supervisor affirms or revises the self-evaluation of performance on a scale of 1 to 5 or so, coaches the team member in problem solving, and then determines any areas of improvement. Then you set your goals for the next one. The evaluation that you got is fed into a continuous evaluation spreadsheet, which the manager edits and the team member can always see. So that is a way that the manager can use the spreadsheet to evaluate potential opportunities. And the team member can always see what they need to do to improve over time. So it helps team members always know where they stand, gain psychological safety to know if they're taking risks. It's okay to take risks and make mistakes because the manager praises them and evaluates them positively for doing so. And it helps them work on areas where they can improve. It's really improves retention and career growth because it helps build a relationship between the manager and the team member, which has been shown to be key for employee retention and engagement, connection to company culture. So those are key things. You want to get feedback from team members on the performance management to review and improve the process every quarter. So that's going to be an important part of improving the process. I'm just giving you an outline. You need to adapt it to your context and then review and improve. Okay, and this will help address the problems identified earlier in the peer-reviewed trials where the managers were not aligned with the actual productivity, with actual performance of their team members. So this approach really helps create that alignment between the manager and the team member in their performance. Now, let's talk about collaboration. So we talked about performance management. That's going to be a fundamental basis for effective collaboration, for effective hybrid work, because if managers are unable to measure people's performance, then they're just going to want everyone back in the office. Let's talk about collaboration. Virtual co-working is an excellent technique to facilitate collaboration. So everyone on the team gets a video conference call, whether it be Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or so on. You turn off your microphone, you leave your speakers on, and your video is going to be optional. Now, what you do is you on your individual tasks during this video conference call. So you will not be a typical meeting. You will not intend to work on collaborative tasks, but you'll work on your individual tasks. That's why you turn off your microphones, but you leave your speakers on. And your videos can be optional. More extroverted people might leave their video on. More introverted people will not. The key is if anyone has questions or wants to problem solve together, that's when you turn on your microphone. And then you can ask questions. You can problem solve. You can figure out whatever issues might be going on. I've seen teams, I've facilitated these a lot. So teams usually save more tricky issues of conversation, of discussion that they might need feedback on for this time period. I recommend teams starting with once a week for an hour, but most teams move on to once a day because it's so helpful. Now, it's a best practice for boosting collaboration and helping bond teams and connecting teams to company culture. It's especially helpful for junior staff because It provides them with on-the-job training, which is a challenge definitely in remote settings, and onboarding into company culture. So that's how you work on collaboration. Let's talk about communication. Clarity Canvas is really helpful for communication. This is a centralized hub for sharing the team's documents, processes, tasks. It should have your team's goals, short, medium, and long term, the roles and responsibilities of different team members, and your policies, processes, and instructions. And then the various projects that you're working on and the timelines and progress on each one. The larger projects should have a clarity canvas for each project. Create these documents together as a team. You want to work on them together so that all team members are come together in person or virtually and work through each element of the team clarity canvas to make sure that you're on the same page about all of them. And for each project, place clarity canvas for larger projects as well. You'll solve a lot of comprehension gaps, misunderstandings, and get mutual commitment and buy. So this is a really useful technique for communication. Okay, what about challenges in collaboration learning? So that third peer-reviewed study talked about collaboration and learning challenges. How do you solve these? Now, this hybrid work does result in a major challenge. We see a stronger connection to your own team, but weaker connections to other teams. So this is an issue. You also have a weaker connection to organizational culture as a whole. So that harms collaboration. It's especially harmful for learning for junior staff. So the best solution is to establish a hybrid mentoring program. What you want in a hybrid mentoring program is two members. One, a senior staff member who's not the supervisor. So not someone who's the supervisor, but you're from your own team, and one from another part of the organization. Mentor from your own team. What is that person? What you do is you help your junior employee with on-the-job training, quickly answering questions, for example, and so on. So that's the person from your own team. Helps the junior employee with quick on-the-job training, also helping with team bonding into the team, getting into the team, building relationships, explaining team dynamics. That's important. The mentor from the other part of the organization helps the employee with forming connections across the organization. Those weak ties that are really harmed by working in a not in the office where you can't easily run into people from across the organization. And then integration into the broader organizational culture through help, and that helps your career develop. You get the insights from other parts of the organization. Now, at the mentoring, what should you do? So you want to meet at least once a month for 20 to 30 minutes, ideally in person, especially in the start of a mentoring relationship. Also do co-working sessions of the type I mentioned once a week. So you get on a video conference call, mics off, speakers on, video out, or work on your individual tasks. If the mentee has questions, they can turn on the microphone and ask for help. Again, very helpful for on-the-job training and onboarding into organizational culture. Okay, so hopefully that has been helpful for addressing the challenge identified for collaboration and learning. So that is going to be crucial for you if you want to make good decisions. So collaboration and learning, addressing that third peer-reviewed trial. We talked about the Clarity Canvas to address the challenges in communication. We talked about virtual co-working to address the challenges in collaboration, and we talked about the frequent small-scale weekly performance evaluations to address hybrid performance management. So what are the takeaways for what we're seeing as a key inflection on the future of work? You want to integrate addressing the decision-making cognitive biases into your culture. If you want, so again, I talked about the status quo bias, so tendency to stick to the status quo, even if it's not good for us, the empathy gap, misunderstanding, underestimating other people's emotions. I talked about functional fixedness, the tendency to be fixed into one way of working, even if our context is disrupted, and what used to be functional becomes dysfunctional. That's what you need to do to optimize business outcomes in the future of work. Use a team-led hybrid first model with a minority fully remote. If you want to retain the best talent, improve productivity. So again, a team-led model, it's not a top-level leadership making decision coming to the office, not individuals, but teams coming together and making the decisions that work best for themselves. And at the rank and file team level with your immediate supervisor, so that immediate supervisor making the decision. Okay, good. Then You want to adapt your culture more broadly to hybrid work. So you want to train on effective hybrid work in virtual communication and collaboration. So that's going to be really important. Then we talked about a number of techniques. Small-scale, frequent performance evaluations to address the problems that we've seen in the peer-reviewed trials, in managers underestimating and not having a good sense of hybrid performance management. Virtual coworking to address collaboration challenges. The Clarity Canvas to address communication challenges, and hybrid mentoring to address challenges with learning and collaboration and on-the-job training. Now it's up to you. Go out and make it happen, and I'll be happy to give you the resources to do so. So again, you can see the information under my name, tinyurl.com/DAE event for resources. So the resources will be a copy of my best-selling book, Returning to the Office and Leading Hybrid Remote Teams. I'll also send you the slides, and as a bonus, a free coaching session for the first 3 claims. So the first 3 people who reach out to me, ask for a coaching session, I'll be happy to provide. And Jonathan, there's going to be the link is also going to be in the comments, so Jonathan will share that again. And go to tinyurl.com/DAE event for these resources. So finally, tinyurl.com/DAE event, a copy of my book, the slides, and a free coaching session. All right, everyone. I'll be happy to take any questions at this stage.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Gleb. So, folks, I have included the link to Dr. Gleb's resources in the comment section. Feel free to go to them after and input your information after them. Excuse me, after the live stream ends. All right, so we are also at the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please post your comments and questions in the comment section, and we'll load them onto the stream for Dr. Gleb to answer. So Dr. Gleb, before we go on to the audience member questions, I do have a couple questions of my own that I wanted to ask, maybe get some clarification on. So my first question, can you share any strategies for managing remote teams or for leadership to manage remote teams to ensure they remain productive? We've heard plenty of stories on both sides when it comes to both being full-time in the office and then full-time remote. There's always pros and cons. So hybrid does seem to be sort of, middle way to get that balance. But are there any specific strategies you'd recommend?
So what I would recommend is to connect very specifically and clearly individual performance to the broader team goals. So I mentioned the OKRs, the KPIs. You need more clear tracking, more clear metrics in a hybrid or a fully remote setting. Because in that setting, you can't as easily coordinate and see people work and manage by working around. So having more clear ties between the team's KPIs, key performance indicators, or OKRs, objectives and key results, combined with that frequent weekly, every 2 weeks, monthly performance management evaluations by the manager. That's what really helps to make sure that remote teams remain productive.
Fantastic, thank you. My next question, and this seems to be a very a big one that pops up when it comes to the workplace. What can companies do to ensure that remote employees feel included and valued? It's obviously different when it comes to being in the office where you have that face-to-face interaction, and less so during remote and hybrid models. So, any thoughts?
Yes, so virtual co-working is an excellent technique here because it allows people who are working remotely to feel connected to people who are working in the office full-time or in a hybrid modality. So if you do virtual co-working, you can do it whether you're working in the office or where you're working from home. So that's a really excellent technique. That's one approach. The other approach I would recommend is making sure to include remote employees in at least once a year event in the office office. You don't have to have an office, of course. You can just rent a hotel or a co-working space. Usually it's better to do it once a quarter. That's what I recommend for companies I work with, but at least once a year. And have an event where you get together and focus on free activities. You want to do socializing and team bonding to build up trust. You want to talk about your broader company and more specifically team strategy. And you want to do professional development. So those are the three activities you want to do. So spend 3 days or so doing those activities, and that will help your remote employees feel valued and recognized.
Fantastic, thank you. So on to our audience member questions. So the first question from our audience member, in your experience, what kind of personality traits and capabilities are required for managers and individual contributors to succeed, i.e. be productive in hybrid work compared to in-person work?
Yeah, it's actually something I studied. So looking at the psychology of this, if you look at the Big Five personalities test, so I applied this to companies I worked with, and what we see with people who are most successful, who have more flexibility, hybrid, remote, whatever, is people who are high on conscientiousness. High on conscientiousness meaning that they are responsible. So that is going to be really important for people to be effective when they're working remotely. So high conscientiousness is a big value. Then people who are open to experiences. So these are people who are more flexible and they're able to work more effectively in new and different contexts. So that's another benefit that I've seen. So those are two big kind of aspects of psychology that you want. So people who are conscientious, who can work without others around them, motivating them and pushing them to work. That's an important. And people who are open to new ways, functional fixedness problem that I mentioned earlier.
Great, thank you. And to our audience member, thank you for sending in your question. This next question, bottom line, from John, our audience member, John, bottom line, how do we convince management that hybrid is a win-win for everyone?
Well, a good way is to send them a copy of this presentation and my book. So you'll have, I think, ability to send the IEEE video of this presentation. And I think Jonathan will send that to everyone who is coming from the presentation. And again, my book, you can go to tinyurl.com/DAE event. I think the data that I provide, both from the surveys and from the peer-reviewed trials, is going to be good evidence. And will help them to understand that they can have techniques to work and manage people effectively in a hybrid model. Because what I see often is that managers don't realize how to manage people, how to evaluate performance, how to collaborate, how to communicate, how to have learning and mentoring in a hybrid model. And you can do that, but they don't know about it because they're not trained on it.
Thanks for the question, John. So while we're waiting on more audience member questions, we'll just go with some more that I have. Can you provide examples of cost-saving measures that have been successful for your clients in a hybrid work model?
Sure. I mean, one simple cost saving measure is to, instead of having pay increases, so we know that from research, people are willing to trade about 8% of their salary for the benefits of working in a flexible manner. So what we did was, for those people who are asked to come to the office, we paid for their commuting benefits. So instead of increasing salary by a certain amount, we made it fair. We paid for the commuting benefits of those people who are coming to the office. So if people are coming to the office more frequently, they're getting higher commuting benefits. Same thing, we pay for their childcare needs. We paid for their food in the office. We paid for their dry cleaning service, things that you need to do to actually have effective coming to the office. That's one.
Mhm.
And you also, of course, want to pay for people to be productive when they're working from home, which means paying for their laptops and paying for their standing desks for those who need them. Just equip them well. So that's one element. Another element is just office space savings. That's huge. If you move to a fully remote modality, you can get rid of the second largest item in costs for most service-oriented companies, which is real estate. And if you go to a hybrid modality, you can certainly get rid of some of your real estate because, of course, it's much less occupied. So that's another benefit.
For sure, thank you. So yeah, the office cost savings for sure. The space office space savings is probably huge, and I've heard that point being made plenty of times. So in the event of a just curious, an organization or a company going fully remote for the most part, but want to meet from time to time. Are there any options that you would probably recommend? You've heard stuff about rental office spaces for a
Yeah,
day or stuff like that. I would love to hear
exactly.
some perspective on that.
Yeah, flex spaces are the best option. There are a number of flex office space providers, which you can check. IWG, WeWork, whatever, all of these sorts of companies provide very nice flex office spaces to enable people to work together if you want to have a quarterly team meeting or something like that.
Yeah, definitely been seeing a lot more of those spaces getting bigger and bigger as time moves on too. So there definitely is a market for that as well. Um, my next question: how can organizations approach change management during transition to hybrid work? No big changes happens all at once, so that transition period can be pretty either lengthy or pretty strenuous. So, any thoughts on that?
Hmm. So what you want to do is make sure to get buy-in from your team members. And the way I do that whenever I start a project with a company, we start with a thorough survey. By the way, that's going to be in the book. So again, the book, annual.com/TA event. So get the book, the surveys in the book, back of the book. So what you do is you run a thorough survey and make sure it's anonymous and get feedback from your team members on what they think about what your current setup is. Give them some options for where you want to move forward. So figure out what kind of hybrid work models will have a lot of support from your team. And even if the final option is not going to be what some team members prefer, they'll feel heard and they'll know that they will have some input. So that's one. Then the second part is to do focus groups. So don't only do a survey, but go deeper into it. Ask about why people answer the survey questions in a certain way. And you can test out during the focus group various options and see what people think during the focus groups. And make sure that you don't have focus groups with supervisors and their team members who are directly report to them. So you have separate focus groups for supervisors and have direct focus groups for rank and file team members. And then that gets you both the quantitative from the survey and really good qualitative from focus groups. And so that combination will help people feel heard and will impact whatever final model you adopt. So that is something I strongly recommend when you're trying to adapt and transition to hybrid work.
Great, thank you. Since we're approaching near the end of the hour, I just have a couple more questions before we close things off. Another question: how can leadership? So we've heard a lot the perspective typically that it's the leadership that's resistant to change switching over. But on the other hand, I've also heard stories about how the employees themselves are resistant to that change, just because change can be pretty scary, especially when it comes to larger organizations. So how can leadership address resistance to change from their employees during the transition?
Well, going back to the survey and focus groups, presumably from that, you'll have understood some of the reasons for why people might be resistant to whatever changes you're trying to propose. And you can address the specific roots of the problem. That's what the key is. People want to feel heard, and they want to feel that the problems are addressed. For example, the biggest problem I hear from people about why they don't want to spend more time in the office, for example, is going to be commuting. That's the biggest problem. So you can address that by providing commuting benefits. It's pretty expensive to go to the office. There was a recent study, and this one came out about a week ago, which showed that working from home per day costs something like $19, and working from an office per day costs something like $60. That's a big benefit for working from home. And a lot of it comes from commuting costs, gas and so on, wear and tear in the car, public transport. So pay for that. Pay for their commuting costs, pay for their foods, dry cleaning, pay for their childcare, all of those sorts of things which provide a problem for people. Then, on the other hand, some people have challenges working from home because they have a noisy environment or something like that. Maybe they have difficulty with work-life balance when they're working from home. So you can provide them with a pass to a flex office space if you don't have an office space of your own. Let's say you're working fully remotely or they're working far away from the office. You can provide them with a pass to flex office space. An annual subscription is not too expensive per day. And so that's something that you can provide and address that problem. And whatever problems there are, you need to address the specific roots of the problem.
For sure, thank you. And actually, we have received an audience member question, so we'll close it off with this last question. How do you deal with connectivity, internet issues for remote working in a hybrid scenario?
So one of the biggest issues I see that companies fail to do is they fail to pay for employee internet. And what I
Mm,
strongly encourage my clients to do, and they do, is to pay for high quality internet bandwidth for their employees. That's really important too. So have high quality bandwidth for employees and have an option for them if something happens during the day, pay for them to be able to go to an internet cafe or to a workspace, pay for whatever expenses is associated with like coffee in the internet cafe or the pass to a flex office space in the unlikely event that there's connectivity issues.
sounds really great, actually. I just from what I've seen personally, usually staff employees are kind of on their own when it comes to connectivity.
Mm.
These issues happen, and there's no simple workaround for it. But yeah, I mean that sounds like a great option. So hopefully organizations take on those best practices. Well, all right, everyone. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Dr. Gleb, thank you so much for joining us today and providing your expert insights on how organizational leadership can increase productivity and maintain thriving culture in a hybrid work model. Always glad to have you, and really great presentation. So thank you so much.
And thank you so much for inviting me, Jim. And thank you, everyone. Hope you get a copy of my book again, tinyurl.com/DAE event. It's going to be in the resources and under my name.
And thank you to our audience for tuning in and for your great questions as well. Just a quick couple announcements before we end things today. First, registration is still open for our two upcoming events happening this fall. Our first event, the Packaging Chips with Chips Summit in Scottsdale, Arizona, hosted by IEEE-USA and IEEE Region 6, pardon me, is just 1 week away. If you're an industry leader who wants to get a better idea of how the CHIPS Act will affect your businesses and how to stay ahead into this industry, this summit is one that you definitely don't want to miss. Again, this is 1 week away next Thursday. If you are local to that area, we definitely recommend you attend. Our previous event in California was a huge hit, so we'd love to see you all there. The second event, IEEE USA, the IEEE USA Innovation Workforce and Research Conference, or iWork for short, will be holding its next event in Huntsville, Alabama, December 3rd through the 4th. This event offers a chance to meet potential partners from U.S. federal agencies and learn how you can contribute to the Alabama and Southeast innovation ecosystem. It's an opportunity you definitely don't want to miss. Finally, a message from our sponsor, the IEEE Member Group Insurance Program, powered by AMBA. AMBA offers tailored insurance solutions for IEEE members, including health, life, and disability coverage. Visit their website to explore the benefits and options available to you. If you enjoyed the content presented in today's webinar, be sure to check out our extensive catalog of other presentations and publications available on demand on our website for your viewing pleasure. If you haven't yet, be sure to like and subscribe to our social media channels, and don't forget to check back daily for future live updates on upcoming events. Have a great day, everyone.
Your IEEE membership means access to insurance products featuring exclusive group rates, flexible benefit options, and portable coverage that stays with you throughout your career. Engineered to help protect your loved ones and your financial security. For more information, go to IEEEinsurance.com.